Hey everyone, welcome back to the HR Stories podcast where there's a lesson in every story. This is part two. Last week was part one. We talked about, all kind of developments coming up for 2026. So this is our employment law in 2026, part two, what's unsettled, what might reverse, and how to, lead forward and go forward anyways. So, John,
I'm here.
you're
Yeah.
here.
Yeah, and I think you did a good job. But in our last episode, right, we spent time grounding ourselves, grounding the HR small business owners and what's already real in 2026. Like what is actually law, what's not law, what do we need to be paying attention to? And the areas where employees are getting tripped up early on. So if you haven't listened to part one, go back, listen to this episode because you can do that, and then go back and listen to part one, kind of pull all of that in there, because today we're going to take a little different bent.
Yeah, today we want to talk about the other half of the picture. Everything that feels unsettled, unclear, or kind of unfinished. You know, how HR leaders make solid decisions when the rules aren't fully formed. Because 2026 and in 2026, I guess, the risk isn't just getting a law wrong, it's getting caught kind of, I guess, flat-footed.
Yeah, by drift, right? All of a sudden you're sitting there not paying attention. You've been right, Chuck. You live on the beach,
Yeah.
right? And you're sitting there, right? You're on the beach. You're having a lovely walk with your wife, and the waves are coming, but they're not hurting you. And then all of a sudden, that surprise wave comes and
Boom,
knocks you down, and you get sand in your underwear.
boom, boom, boom.
All right,
Yeah,
yeah. So this year isn't just about compliance, it's also a judgment year, meaning we have to make the best judgments for our
yes.
organization.
So let's talk about, John, why wait and see is kind of a bad strategy. You know, one thing we hear a lot right now is, hey, we're just waiting to kind of see
Yeah,
what
see what
happens.
happens.
Yeah, and I get it. Emotionally, that feels safe.
Right. And it makes sense emotionally, but usually not a great strategy operationally.
Yeah, so waiting doesn't stop wage increases, doesn't stop pay transparency questions, candidate expectations, or complaints. And it definitely doesn't stop the everyday stuff like managers improvising answers, which is always going to be a problem. It never leads to good things when they improvise answers and they create that inconsistent practice without realizing it.
I laughed so hard when you said that line about the managers. I think it's, I mean, so true, right? And I say this in my classes that when we look at the issues from an HR, the issues that cause HR headaches,
Mm-hmm.
I can point back and probably 75% is because the manager did something wrong.
Yeah.
Right. So most of the risk employers face in the years like this doesn't come from sudden new laws. It comes from drift. Like, what's going on? I don't know what's going on. Decisions don't get revisited. Assumptions don't get questioned. And suddenly you're out of alignment without realizing.
Yeah. So the question isn't what will the government do next. It's what are we relying on assumptions that used to be, or where are we relying on assumptions that used to be fine, okay, but they're really not safe anymore. And then what's our highest common factor approach? So we're not rebuilding. I guess you could say, no, we're not rebuilding an airplane in mid flight every time a state or a law changes.
Yeah. Right. And so let's start with the National Labor Relations Board.
Mm-hmm.
It's been quieted a little bit, right? It's been quieted, limited. It's probably all through last year. We didn't hear a lot coming from it. Things were happening, but not very much. So this is a really good example of this dynamic right now.
Yeah, so it's a good example why unsettled doesn't mean inactive. The board went through a period where quorum issues slowed a majority of the decisions, but the big change is the Senate restored the NLRB's quorum in late 2025, which means the board can issue rulings again and work through that backlog.
Yeah, in fact, it wasn't actually 2025. It was actually 2026. It was actually a couple days
Oh,
ago.
yes, sorry, typo,
Right? Yeah,
typo
no,
in my
it's
mind.
fine. And then so it's really interesting. So when you think of these government agencies, right, there's this commissions at the top of these things. And for them to make a decision, there needs to be a quorum, enough people to make a decision. And for the National Labor Board, they weren't there. There wasn't enough commissioners. So in 2025, it was a quiet year because they were enforcing policies that maybe were not enforcing policies that were already in there. So it doesn't mean labor law risk has gone away. It's just shifted a little bit.
Yeah, and even during that quiet period, regional and LRB offices were still active. They were investigating complaints and applying existing standards. And employers who treated, we were treated to no headlines, like no risk. However, employers were still exposed.
Yeah, and we had these big decisions. I think it was in 2024 with Stericycle. Remember, we talked a lot about that on the podcast. I think we did a bunch of episodes around it.
Yes.
And SEMEX and SMEX. And so up until recently, they were still shaping policy, although the agents weren't really enforced. They were told not to enforce them. They were still law. They were still on the boards, not losing them. And so what we're looking at now is what will the commission do with those rulings? Expectation? I'll tell you my expectation, Chuck. You can tell me yours, is those will probably be rolled back in some form or manner because they helped employees become unionized more so than I think the present administration wants.
Well, yeah. So, look, even if the board isn't issuing these new rulings, this is where normal sounding policies get people in trouble because the question isn't what you intended, it's whether an employee could reasonably read it as chilling their rights. And that's something we addressed in those episodes. It's when organizing events and activity pop up, but then your managers make small missteps and it becomes expensive.
Yeah, right. So it becomes very expensive fast. So here's the action. It's not to panic, everyone. Don't go panic. It's awareness. It's paying attention.
Yeah. Okay, so this is a great time to read your handbook, folks. The way an investigator would read it, or a skeptical employee who's trying to find something.
Right.
Then do one practical thing. Pick your 3 most common manager flashpoints: attendance, scheduling, and discipline. No matter what industry you're in, those are the big flashpoints. And make sure your leaders have a clean script that stays factual, they don't editorialize, and they're being consistent.
And it's just as important as a good time to train managers on how they talk about rules, scheduling, discipline, and complaints, because tone and framing matters as much as policy language right now.
Yeah. So let's come back to the Department of Labor for a moment. We talked about last week during part 1, and, because the silence isn't across the board, it's selective. So you may see quiet or pauses around certain policy areas, but wage and hour enforcement is still very real. The Department of Labor just reported recovering $259 million in back wages for 177,000 employees in fiscal year 2025. And unless you're here on the HR Stories podcast or you're reading somewhere this information, you don't know that. I mean, it's not been making big news.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, right? They go in and I mean, they're back doing this anyway. News releases like this company did this and this company did that, right? And so it's still happening, not as loud as it has in other administrations. So when an agency goes quiet like this, it usually means something is happening behind the scenes: litigation, leadership changes, or internal disagreement about the next step.
And that's especially true with the independent contractor classification.
Which is why it's risky to lock into long-term workplace strategies based on temporary paused enforcement. Because that independent contractors, we have, okay, this is what we're thinking. We're going to do that, but we don't know yet, right? And one of the things we do know is that the next administration may change it, right? Because we saw that from Trump to Biden to Trump, right? And so it just goes back and forth and back and forth. And so just being careful, not locking in long, maybe short term, maybe looking ahead 6 months, that's fine. But going long term, you have to be careful.
Yeah, so kind of a takeoff from our part one last week, but a smarter approach is to build flexibility into your staffing model. Revisit your classification decisions on a schedule, perhaps quarterly or semi-annually, especially when roles evolve. Treat job classifications like a living decision, not a one-time label you set and forget. Let's talk about segment 4 of our episode today. John, non-competes.
Yeah, from control to competition. So non-compete agreements are another area where uncertainty is driving a lot of anxiety.
Yeah, between the FTC activity, court challenges, state level restrictions, it's understandable that employers feel unsure about what will hold up. So instead of clinging to one document and hoping it survives, shift to a strategy that protects the business even if the law swings.
Yeah, and I think about it, right? Because we had under the Biden administration, the Federal Trade Commission was like, we're looking at non-competes. We're just gonna eliminate them altogether. And then that went out, and then they're like, well, maybe we're just gonna eliminate some of them. And honestly, I think it's common sense. Like you should be like, and I think McDonald's just settled, right? They were putting on non-competes for their fry cooks. And it's hello, like that's not a serious, important enough position that they couldn't go to couldn't go to Wendy's. And so really thinking about why are you putting that non-compete in? Now there are certain people like so. My time at QVC, all of our hosts had a non-compete. That makes sense. They're the face of the company. We don't want them to be on our air and then jump on and be on somebody else's air, right?
Yeah.
And so being aware of that in there. So shift your conversation from away from control to legitimate business interest.
Yeah, and that's important. What is and that is it. What is important? What are you actually trying to protect? Confidential information, customer relationships, but that blanket restriction, that's not going to work anymore. That's the stuff that's going to get challenged first.
Yeah. Often that means strengthening confidentiality agreements, using non-solicitation clauses where allowed, and focusing more on retention than restriction.
Yep. Okay, we're kind of coming around the segments here. We got a couple more, and I want to talk a little bit about states.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, the national
states?
level, but we're going to get on to states. There are real drivers of change, and if there's one consistent theme across all of this, it's that the states are doing most of the heavy lifting right now when it comes to wages, paid leave, pay transparency, and AI rules. And look, if you're a multi-state employer, the safest mindset is often what's the most stringent rule we touch, and then kind of build a baseline around that.
Yeah, and there's momentum, right? We see this. States are taking the opportunity to go, what do we believe in? Let's put it in laws. And so we're seeing that all across the country in all different types of states. And so what's happening for the employer that's multi-state or even not multi-state, but maybe have a remote workers, it becomes harder and harder to be like, how are we going to handle this? How do we deal with all that?
Yeah. So one way you deal with it is listen to the HR Stories podcast,
Woohoo!
where we bring some of these things to you.
Yeah.
But you have got to, as an employer, stop thinking in terms of that once a year compliance updates. See, John, that's how these things end up looking like companies look like they're compliant on paper, but then they're completely off the rails by July.
Yeah, and that's kind of that you use July is a really good point, right? Because there's a lot of laws that go into effect on July 1st, right? And you're thinking, oh, January, yep, that's I gotta make sure I get all my new employment laws, and we don't pay attention. And then July 1st comes around, and there's other ones that kind of come out there, right? So kind of pay attention. All right, so here, Chuck, is our action steps for this. A more sustainable approach is assigning one person responsible for tracking state and local changes, maintaining a simple tracker, and scheduling a quarterly review to decide what actual requirements, what actually requires action.
Yeah,
Wow.
and that's okay because there's a lot there, but that one process alone could help reduce panic and prevent last minute
Yeah,
scrambles
and,
on your behalf.
and let me just say something on this because it may not be the person in your organization. It may be your employment lawyer. You may need to sit down with your employment lawyer and like, look, we know things are changing. We know they're coming. We need from you a quarterly report of like what's happening, how it's going to impact us so we can make the right adjustments in there. And that's money well spent, I will say. Or hiring an HR consultant. Say, look, this is what we need you for. We want to be paying attention to this. We want to make sure they know. And a lot of the HR consultants we know are really up to date on this stuff, especially for their region, especially for their state, because they don't have one client, they have a whole bunch of clients. And so that becomes a really important thing in there. All right. Manager behavior is where most risk lives. We should also say clearly, right? Most legal risk doesn't come from policy language. It comes from the day-to-day management behavior.
Yes. I see it all. I always tell people, train yourself, then train your managers. Your managers are the ones that are out there dealing with employees day to day. And if you're lucky, an employee will come into HR and say, hey, my manager said this. Is this true? Or, but if you're not lucky and they run with it and it's wrong, look,
yeah, but
yeah.
Yeah, I mean that means that you've done a fantastic job as an HR person to build trust and confidence, and they're going to come to you. Yeah. A lot of the times that's not happening. One of the things that you do, Chuck, in person that I've seen is that you get up from your desk, you walk around, and you connect with your employees because that way they're going to be like, hey, my boss just said that. Is that true?
Yeah. It happens.
And then you be like, yeah.
All the time, because employees tend to be, John, a little more aware of their rights, more willing to ask those pay questions, more likely to challenge decisions they don't understand. And you've got these risks that weren't there 5 years ago, like candidates impersonating, and with AI. And AI has driven a lot of these fraud attempts. So there's a lot of crazy stuff out there.
Yeah, and again, I think, and listen, I'm saying this from somebody that does this for a living, that loves doing it. You have to train your managers. Train them, train them, train them. I'm working on a program, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to come out. You're going to love it. That's going to be training managers to be better managers at all levels. Not only the knowledge and the skills, but we're talking about how do we get people to perform better? How do I know myself so I understand why my point of view may be different than my employees, right? We're getting into all that stuff. Really important around communication, documentation, and consistency. You have to train your managers. Here's what I will tell Chuck and all my HR friends out there. When you train your managers, your job becomes easier.
It does.
It's as simple as that. Simple as that.
Yeah, it does. It does. And a lot of times we're like, we don't have time to train the managers, but you've got to find the time. So
or hire somebody to do it. Hint, hint, knock, knock.
Yeah.
Right.
So, anyways, it improves trust. When you train your managers. Oh, sorry, John. You probably want to have a wrap up here, right?
That was it. No, yeah,
Oh,
we're
that was
going
it.
right into.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
want to go
So,
right into how HR leaders stay sane in
okay.
these uncertain
Yeah,
times.
folks, this is like back and forth. Sometimes we're we step on each other, but this is what we're trying to have a conversation for your benefit. So, yeah, let's go into one of our final segments here. I want to talk about sustainability because
What?
yes, because years like this can burn people out, especially when they feel like they're expected to be a walking legal encyclopedia and a therapist and a compliance officer and probably a development professional too for leadership development.
Yeah. And the strongest HR leaders that we work with aren't trying to be an encyclopedia. They're trying to do two things, Chuck. They're trying to be good decision makers, but they're also trying to create an environment where their managers and their employees can be good decision makers as well.
Yeah, so you got to focus on the fundamentals, which are pretty much documenting your reasoning. You need to make sure you have documentation on your reasoning and build those simple systems for revisiting those decisions. So you forget, you go back, oh, this is why I made that decision. So you're steady, not reactive, and you can't reinvent the wheel every time things change. I mean, you're gonna have to find your stable core.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, right? I think again, looking at that and going, all right, how do I consistently do this, right? How do I consistently do that? What kind of systems do I create? Because we've been really talking about this, Chuck and I, a lot lately about systems are really important to get the right decisions. And checklists are a tool that helps create those checklists, right? And so, again, recommending the ultimate guide to HR checklist edition, but it's part of a system, right? And if your people are not using it, or you're not, if they're not making decisions or going, I'm not going to skip that,
Yeah.
that's going to be a problem, right? So creating that system, part of that is culture in there. So here's our action kind of woven into this conversation. If you can explain why you made a decision at the time, you're in a much better position than if you're just reacting in the moment.
Yeah. So, John, the Monday Morning Playbook, Part 2 edition. Where are we here?
All right, so someone listened to both episodes and asked, what do we do now, Chuck and John? You're great. You get to sit behind the microphones. How would we answer, Chuck?
Okay. So, this first quarter,
Yeah.
take time, look at your own assumptions on things, assumptions you made a year or two ago about contractors, pay, leave, different manager practices. Ask whether they still hold up here in 2026, and take a look at some of the things, like we're talking about now. For example, in 2026, there's going to be a 27-week paycheck year if you're on a bi-weekly cycle. So if you didn't plan for it, finance gets surprised, employees get confused. So HR, you've got to still stay on the forefront of what's happening.
And I would say about that 27 paycheck year, you may want to communicate that out because again, you don't have to do it right now, but at some point in 2027, they're going to be looking, I got paid more.
Yeah.
Right? They're going to be like, "Ooh, I got paid more. How did that happen?" Right? And you're going to be like, "Oh, well, there was a 27 pay week, blah 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 blah." Right? And so being aware of all those things. And I would say, Chuck, the other thing that I recommend business owners, I recommend HR leaders, nonprofit managers, put strategy time on your schedule. Put strategy time on your schedule. Maybe you start with 1 hour a week. I recommend having 10 hours, but start there. And what I tell my executives that I'm coaching is you want to work on your business, not in your business. And that is so important for HR, right? You need to make sure that you're doing that. So creating that space for intentional review instead of constant reaction will make your job so much better. All right, Chuck, what is your final takeaway?
Yeah, well, employment law in 2026 isn't about predicting the future perfectly.
It's about leading when the future isn't clear.
Yeah. And not letting uncertainty turn into drift. Use that term earlier. Never heard it before, but I'm going to use it now. Drift.
Yeah, you're going to hear drift. Yeah. Drift, it's like when that big wave comes and knocks you down. Yeah, I get it. Any last words, Chuck? I know you were holding up our book. You can't get enough of it.
Still a great resource going into 2026. The Ultimate Guide to HR Checklist Edition. And it is approved for 3 SHRM credits. It is, Society of HR Manager. We've been selling it at the those conferences. It's been selling out. Folks, go to ultimateguidetohr.com, Ultimate Guide to HR, or go to amazon.com and look it up. John, we'd go without saying thank you to Samantha, our producer.
Oh, of course.
She's been unbelievable. All the fancy graphics and, the way she makes us look leaner, stronger, better looking, younger.
Yeah. She's great. Samantha's great. And I will say that she did the work in December. You and I were kind of crazy with business stuff, and she jumped in there and
did it all.
Really took it lead and did a great job. So we're definitely recognized her. We recognized her in person. But we wanted to recognize her on air as well because she's great. Hey, the other person I want to recognize, Chuck?
Who, John?
It's you. You're always there, right? You're always there. You're always bringing your ideas and concepts to the team at HR Stories, right? And so that's our consulting edge, and we're going to be doing more of that in 2026. We're going to do a lot more audits, but not really audits. We're going to do a lot more. We're looking for people that want us to come in and look at the systems of HR and how we can improve those, right? And sometimes it's about intention, right? Making better intentional decisions. Other times, it's just getting into the nitty and gritty.
Folks, you've been listening to the HR Stories podcast, where
there's a lesson in every story.